There's this very interesting company that I followed called biotech. It's sold to AstraZeneca for like $1 billion. European company, very small. They went from the idea to human data in like less than 4 years, which is an insane timeline. The way they did it is they went to China. The investors that used to fund biotech companies in Boston or Silicon Valley are now going to China. And so you have to ask yourself, how am I competitive with a 996?
This is Lada Nuzhna, and she is the founder and CEO of General Control. Do you want to just start off with why are we here in the Redwoods?
Well, you invited me here. We drove 2 hours to Redwoods. While we were driving here, I did realize there was a little bit of symbolism to this, in that trees around us are close to 1,000 years old. And I was like, oh, there is a connection here. The interview is about aging, so yeah.
What got you inspired about aging in the first place?
I didn't start in biology. I, since my early childhood, was hell-bent on sort of doing physics and figuring out secrets of the universe, answering like very fundamental questions about like why we here, what was there before anything, like can we reconcile quantum mechanics with like general relativity. And I think at some point when I was in college, I had like a list of running questions that I was like, I want to spend my career answering those, and realized that many of them are many Nobel Prizes away from being answered and probably won't be answered within my lifetime. It was sort of like, I'm not a person who naturally feels FOMO. Like I can miss 1,000 parties and never notice, but that was the first time I truly felt a FOMO for the future, because I realized that the future is this like crazy exciting party and I won't be part of it. And that was the moment I was like, okay, can I stay here for longer? And I didn't know that aging was like a real space, because like I think I Googled it for the first time when I was a kid. She's like, can we live forever? And there was something about telomeres that popped up, which is like a dead theory of aging by now. But back then that was like the only answer. And then I started looking at the space again around 2020, 2021, and realized that there's actually a lot of work being done. It's still very early stage, but at least there are like real labs in academia working on those things. And it was like, the time is now.
If the telomeres like don't work, what kind of path did you decide to go down in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, telomeres do work biologically, but it's not the answers for why we age. I think the answer is like there are thousands of reasons, and like a messy house can be messy in multiple ways. So there isn't necessarily a cause of aging. It's just that evolution never, we never evolved to live to 200 years. There is no reason to keep us around for that long once we've reproduced and have an offspring that can carry on our genes. But I think, so I started from sort of a founder perspective. I spent a few years just funding early stage research, and got to see a lot of science happening across academia, everything from basic science to clinical trials. My favorite area of research has always been sort of tools and new sort of ways of measuring and editing biology, partially because I realized just like looking at the history of biotechnology, those were the biggest multipliers of progress in bio. It's not studying just one protein that might be causing the disease. It's figuring out how to measure thousands of them at the same time. Like I think it's especially obvious when you look at something like Human Genome Project, where we spent several decades and like billions of dollars trying to sequence one human genome.
One human.
Yeah. And they would publish every few years, like, oh, it's almost complete now. It's almost complete. And at some point you're like, why is it taking so long? And it's because we are using Sanger and shotgun sequencing, and now we can sequence one human genome, like multiple human genomes per day, and spend like a few $100 doing that. And I kind of think about aging in a similar way, in that we can use existing therapeutic modalities, small molecules, like existing therapeutic approaches to try to extend lifespan by a bit, or we can just discover new fundamental ways of modulating the biology, and that's what we are working on. It's a new therapeutic modalities that allow us to essentially write the operating system of the cell.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah. So where do I start? Every cell in your body has essentially the same DNA. Like if I took your neuron cell and say your liver cell and compare the DNA of the two, just a sequence, they would be no different. You wouldn't be able to tell which cell is which. And it's interesting because the same DNA somehow manages to produce like completely different cell type.
Like a brain cell and also like a little muscle or...
Yeah. Like all of them have this fundamentally the same code. What makes them different is the epigenome. So epigenome encodes which genes express in a particular cell. It also encodes how your cell develops over time. And in a way, epigenetics is one of the only ways we know that nature can preset the age of a cell. So one example that is like interesting to think about is no kid is born being 30 years old, even if it's conceived by parents who were 30 years old. So everyone who's born is given a set of eggs and sperm cells at their birth that age for several decades before they conceive a baby. Somehow babies are not old, even though they are somehow appear from the old cells. And so the way it happens is through epigenetic layer. So nature figures out how to reset the age of the cell when it gives rise to a new embryo. And a few people figured it out a few decades ago. There was famous scientist, Nobel Prize winner now, Shinya Yamanaka, who was trying to figure out the factors that make the cell reset its own age that are now called Yamanaka factors. There's just 4 proteins that if you express them in the cell, turn it into induced pluripotent stem cell. That somehow, if you compare its epigenetic age, it's much younger than the cell it was derived from. And so that really was the inspiration for the whole field of genetic reprogramming and the idea that we can use epigenetics to control the programs that cells run. In a way, most of the medicine today works with downstream processes of the cells. So most of the drugs that you go to CVS and grab off the shelf, tweak the proteins very transiently, and you have to take them every day to keep having the same effect.
To get the effect,
Yeah, epigenetics can
rewrite how it interacts. And
yeah, you can write a certain program into the cell at the epigenetic layer, and your daughter cells would keep having the same program. It very much depends on the gene, but I think the exciting thing about the epigenome is that it allows you to permanently alter the state of the cell and go to something that feels more like a cure and less like
a Band-Aid.
A chronic treatment, yes.
Yeah. So you did something before this, which was the Impetus grants, and I think that's kind of interesting because you didn't like immediately jump into starting a company, and you like doled out a whole bunch of money and tried to support a bunch of projects before this. What was kind of the logic of doing that in the first place? And then at what point did you decide that there was like some path that was clear enough where you were like, I can start a company in this and go down that?
I don't think I was ever a person who optimized for starting a company. I know that's sort of like the meme of Silicon Valley, but I actually resisted the meme for a while because I had this idea that aging is the most important thing I can be working on, and I want to do whatever I need to do to solve it, even if it involves doing the things that I don't like, which is like, if I need to go to work in the government to make this happen, I will go and work in the government. So I think I started with that perspective and then started thinking of things where I could contribute that would accelerate progress significantly. And I think when I started, it wasn't clear to me that the company is a way to go. It changed over time, but back then it was clear that the aging field, especially the crazy ideas, are just not getting enough funding. Like if you look at the National Institute of Aging, 60% of their funding goes towards Alzheimer's, literally just one disease. And we know that if we were to cure Alzheimer's, we wouldn't cure aging. So it's just like broken incentive structure. Like if you want to be working on aging, you have to be working on Alzheimer's in academia.
Or else you just don't get funding.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you first started it, I think you basically raised it from a bunch of like crypto people, which is a hilarious way to, I love that.
Crypto, Saudi Arabia.
How the hell did you get them interested in the first place? Just reach out?
I mean, it was gradual. The first check-in was from Juan Benet, God bless his soul, who's like a true visionary in the space of medicines. He was doing a lot of those little projects, and I also was lucky to meet my mentor around the same time, and so we all put it together. And I think after you have some initial traction, it's much easier to propel that forward. So after we gave out the first round of funding, like I think it was
like $1 million or something.
No, it was more than 10 million. I think it was around 15 million that the first round was. And after we gave it out, it was easier to go out and say, like, look at all the things we've done. And actually, there are more projects like that out there. And I think everyone, like, we just obviously heard a lot of positive feedback from academics who would otherwise spend like years trying to write their own grant. It's kind of like very sad because you are trained as a scientist to go and do cool science, and then you go and start your own lab and you're like, well, actually 70% of your time right now is writing 70-page grants.
You basically spend your entire life optimizing for like being a good researcher, and then the actual success or failure is just being able to raise money.
Yeah. I just submitted my first governmental grant recently, and it was like very I was like, I'm never doing this again. Like, I'll take on any dilution
to never experience this process again.
Yeah. And so we made the process much easier. It was like 2-pager, like 2-week response time. Obviously everyone was happy about this.
And like, to put it in perspective, what's the typical response time? And like, what's the typical, like, is it like 100 pages in 6 months?
I would say it's about 70 pages. And depending on the grant, it can be anywhere from like 7 months to like 12 months response time. And after you get a response, it will take even more time to get the actual funding.
Money.
And then you have to do reports. We didn't ask any reports. We just like, if the person is submitting an ambitious idea, we'll trust them to do their best work.
How did you tease out like who was kind of worth trusting in the first place?
I mean, we made a bunch of mistakes, so I didn't know if we figured it out, but it gets easier over time because you see who's getting shit done, who's not getting shit done. We also had like an incredible reviewer team, and setting that up was like, big chunk of effort with setting up the program, because within agent space, you kind of have to identify people who are rigorous yet ambitious, because some academics are rigorous, but then they don't truly have a vision for how the space should look like. And then there are people who are rigorous and ambitious, but they're so centered around, like, so focused on their own research that they would only give a positive review to the ideas that is like in their field. Or actually, like, if they see someone who's working on the same ideas, they're like, well, actually my lab is working on it.
So it's a little bit like a horse with blinders on.
Yes, exactly. And it's sort of finding people who like truly care about the progress in the space. They realize that this mission is more than they are, it's more than their life. It's actually like, if that other competitive lab succeeds, you will succeed too. And I think that's what's unique about aging versus like any other scientific field, is like, you really want other people to succeed.
I mean, I imagine that most people that are in aging are generally like interested in it in the first place because they kind of want to live for a very long time. And so success equals you get to, reap the rewards of that. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you decide to go from that? You're starting your own company. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, there are many approaches to how people build aging companies. There are people who are pursuing the disease. There are people who are trying to target aging, like, in the preventative sense. I think most companies to date largely focused on targeting the disease, and that's what we are doing. We are essentially developing therapeutic modalities that would make it easier to target multifactorial diseases of aging. The problem with many existing therapeutic modalities is that, like, at best we can do bispecific antibodies and target 2 proteins at the same time that are still extracellular. We really can't, with no idea what to do if 1,000 proteins are dysregulated. Like, and if you want to target all of them, like, we can throw multiple pills into your cell, but it doesn't really help. And like, I don't know like how old your parents, or if you ever been around old people, but like, I've
been around a few.
It's like, rarely, like, once you get to a certain age, you don't just have one disease like diabetes, or
it's like this cascade.
Yeah, it's a cascade, and you have to take like 3 pills for each of the diseases that you have, and like eventually it's just like a routine of taking like 15 pills every day, and don't think it's very sustainable.
How do you decide which one to go after first?
Yeah, it's actually an important distinction. We are not working on the partial reprogramming itself, which is like just introducing the transcription factors in the cell and like broadly changing the landscape and identity of the cell. I think it's a promising approach. Our way of targeting is slightly different in that we want to rewrite the gene expression status of specific genes that are obviously driving the state of the disease. To give an example, there is early preclinical work on like some epigenetic editors that can like permanently suppress your cholesterol. So instead of taking, say, years of statins to keep your LDL cholesterol low, you can just like do one and done suppression of a gene that degrades your LDLR receptor and you never get heart attacks. So it's more targeted. We are focusing, so your question was like which diseases, how do we decide which diseases to go after? I think because we are focused on the technology validation, our goal is to pick whichever indication makes it the easiest for us to demonstrate dramatic effect size. The way people usually go about picking what to target is like having genetic validation. To go in and study people who have certain mutations in certain genes that prevents them from developing certain disease. So there are people who never have high cholesterol. Doesn't matter how much red meat they eat. So I think genetic studies is usually like a great asset for figuring out what to target, because like that's the only way you can ever have like human data. It's just like by studying people with certain genes who seem to never develop dementia or to never develop high cholesterol and whatnot.
How are you getting like a short feedback loop on figuring out whether or not something is working?
The interesting thing about targeting disease versus targeting aging is that at least you can run a clinical trial for that. With aging, we technically haven't figured out how to run a clinical trial. Like the best we can do right now is like what people are doing with GLP-1s right now. We're like, well, we know caloric restriction extends lifespan. GLP-1s allow you to calorically restrict the population. It seems like GLP-1s are working for all this like set of disconnected age-related diseases. I think Eli Lilly is now releasing a trial like testing GLP-1s in Alzheimer's, which is like, how's this related? You're just losing weight. And so the way people go about approving aging drugs right now is like, we'll pick a set of diseases, we'll run trials for each of them, and then like if the drug delays onset of all of those diseases at the same time, that might be an aging drug. That's obviously inefficient. Each trial
takes years,
$100 million. The problem is we just don't know how to measure aging. Like we can measure if you die or not, but that takes years.
And also by the time that you actually like get the result, you don't want to know, like you don't want to go so far down the road that you just don't even apply this to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. It's like if you have a disease, there is nothing to lose. Like if you have glioblastoma, you just like you'll enroll in any trials that would have you, or like if you have Alzheimer's.
It's like the Neuralink trials where people are just taking them, or they're implanting these things because they literally can't move anything, and you can like play with your kids again.
Yeah. Like you're willing to take that bet because the alternative is actually not that great. With aging, like that happens over decades, and for most of that time you're actually like a semi-healthy person. So whatever first aging drugs that we develop, it has to be like extra safe, and for that reason it will probably have like a very small effect size, because the bar for safety
has to be so high.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, even nausea with GLP-1s in the clinical trials is kind of like out there. Like, I don't know, like if we can give this drug to many people.
So were there pathways that you were considering going down, but because the safety is maybe like more dubious or not as obvious, you just kind of had to decide no?
I mean, it's different for us because we are a new therapeutic modality. So every time you work with a new therapeutic modality, the safety is slightly different. So you have to pursue the stage of a disease so severe where you're technically one of the only options. That's why I said we sort of have like several camps of aging companies, some that are making it easier to solve a disease or making it easier to discover targets of aging, making it easier to replace whole tissues, and then companies that are, and those that target the disease, and then we have companies that are targeting aging or preventing aging that actually like less ambitious, like bioengineering wise, often working with like existing drugs, but taking on the risk of sort of being the first company to run the agent trial. And there are a few of those, like one of them, I don't know if you know, Celine Halua, working on Loyal, she is sort of building out that path with FDA to run the first agent trial for dogs. I think they're already running the trials. They might even have the data come out soon.
Are they not FDA approved already? Because I thought they had already gone through that process.
I think there was an approved safety, and they're now focusing on efficacy. But yeah, she's. I think it's a visionary company, but Celine would tell you herself that like they probably wouldn't be able to do it with gene therapy, because gene therapy has all kinds of like question marks, and it only makes sense to apply that in severe cases. How long would you want to live?
How long would I want to live? There's this weird dynamic where the people, I don't know if I've ever met someone that was well-adjusted and had, like, that they were waking up in the morning and working on something that they genuinely cared about, and they ever wanted to die. And so I think
Elon.
Well, does he want to die?
Yeah, Elon doesn't believe in longevity.
Do you think he actually doesn't, or does you think that that's just?
He was arguing, I think, with David Sinclair at some point on Twitter. I might be misremembering something, but
I think it's.
he lives a tough life, though.
Yeah, with him in particular, I totally understand him saying that. But then if you look at his actions, it doesn't. He's like trying to create super intelligence, and then also trying to like make it so that you can upload your brain into a computer, through Neuralink, or radically change how humans interact with the world.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe 55 or 60-year-old Elon feels that way, but I don't know that Elon is going to want to die at 80.
Yeah, there is no age at which you're like, even if you're the person who doesn't believe in like immortality or like living to 200, there is no like, any day you wake up, someone asks you like, are you ready to die today? The answer is not today, ever.
Yeah. It's just that continual loop of like, what do you say to the god of death? Just not today.
Yeah, never.
So I don't know. I don't think I want to die. Do you want to die?
No.
Yeah. From like a business building perspective, you are trying to keep your team incredibly small and like agile. How are you deciding, to hire even the first person?
Yeah, I think it's like, I don't know how it is for other industries, but it's impossible to be building like a big hotted biotech company at this time because of how fast enabled China is. It just doesn't make sense financially for any VC to put money into US biotech companies that raise 200 million. It is just being very inefficient. And I think especially in the field of science, before we got started, there was a whole graveyard of companies that were just raising absurd amounts of money and just spending a lot of time on science. And that I think is like a big mind trap for scientists, and that they just love science. They love like exploring science and like doing things better, but never...
This continual research, but never actually producing something.
Like there are companies that raise 200 million, spend like 6 years developing something and never developed a drug and pushed it to the clinic. China can do that like with a few $1 million and a few people.
Wait, so okay, what is the typical process for like getting a drug, approved or some therapy approved in China versus the US? Like why can China do it with literally 40th the capital?
Yeah, it actually doesn't really make sense to approve drugs in China. Even for Chinese people, they're coming to run trials here. What makes more sense is get into human data as fast as you can, because before you have human data, you literally have no value as a company. Your drug might work, might not work. You might have amazing efficacy in mice, but we know that like a small fraction of things that work in mice actually work in humans. And so being able to get to the answer of whether your drug is safe in humans is like, if you can do it as cheaply as possible, you just like reach the inflection point where people are willing to fund you. Like after you have that safety human data, you suddenly have a bunch of pharma partners. You have ways to exit the company after phase one. Many startups actually do that. It's like very few startups actually see the drug development journey end to end, because
They just
like,
exit early for like $1 billion or something.
yeah, after phase one, you can exit at $1 billion valuation. There is like this very interesting company that I followed for a few years called Biotech. So it's sold to AstraZeneca earlier this year for like $1 billion. European company, very small. They raised like, I think, less than 50 million. Very tiny company. And with that money, they went from the idea to human data in like less than 4 years, which is an insane timeline. The way they did it is they went to China. And now that companies that bought them, AstraZeneca, they are using that human data to go and run trials in the US. It actually, I mentioned that it really doesn't make sense to approve drugs in China, because China is just like not a big market. They're big by volume, but the willingness to pay higher price for drugs is much higher in the US. So like every other company in the world would come to the US to run their final clinical trial.
I like read one of the things that you wrote earlier this morning, and you were actually mentioning that there's probably like a bunch of rare diseases or things that, you know, you could go create a drug for it. But I think like the US has like made it illegal to be profitable on those.
Oh no, no, there
am I
are
wrong?
actually like 50% of drugs approved to this day are for rare diseases, like every year, because US just created financial incentives that makes it easier
Possible.
to develop drugs for diseases that have like fewer than 1,000 patients, and for diseases that are like very big. I think what you're referring to is the idea, the sort of compassionate use trials where say a patient comes, they have some rare disease, or like they have Parkinson, it might be a common disease too, and they collaborate with a lab to self-fund a trial in that academic lab or hospital. And it's usually like N of 1 trials. I don't know if you heard about like one of the first gene edited babies earlier this year, baby KJ. That was a compassionate use trial where a group of academics gathered to develop a gene editor for this one baby. But with those, it's basically like you can't profit from that. So it's not a scalable model for a startup. Yeah, other than that, people are developing drugs for rare indications all the time. It's very hard to make money on that.
Yeah.
A few people did, but...
What was it like growing up in Ukraine?
I think my childhood in Ukraine was probably different from other childhoods in Ukraine, because I did grow up in the eastern Ukraine, meaning that for many people, war started 2022. For us, war started back in 2014. I think it's one of those things that if it didn't happen, I don't know if I would be sitting here, because it introduced enough of good chaos in my life such that I just like got in a way detached from the routine and like normal childhood pretty early on. I was living alone since I was 14.
Really?
Yeah.
What? Why?
Many circumstances. I mean, when the war started, my school got shelled the very same year, and I was living in a small hometown, so there were no schools left.
It just got bombed to rubble?
It wasn't a rubble, but it was not operational for basically the whole time after that. They never reopened it. Right now, my hometown is a rubble.
What?
It was taken over by Russia, I think 2024 in February. It was for a long time like a gray zone right the border where most of the battles happened. But yeah, right now it's almost non-existent. But back when I was 14, just after school got shut down, there weren't many schools in that small town. So I had to move somewhere where I could get education. And my parents didn't really want to move. They were
pretty attached to the place.
Yeah.
What makes sense in like bio? What makes sense to back and like to start in the first place? And what is just like absolutely you're throwing money away and like lighting on fire?
Yeah, I mean, I think like any crazy mega rounds without a clear sight to product is a waste of money. We know that like starting a company with $1 billion in funding is almost never a good idea. It doesn't matter how many Nobel Prize winners you put on your board. I think biggest outcomes for any investor is like a small company that's moving fast, like elsewhere really. But in biotech now especially, many of the investors that used to fund biotech companies in Boston or Silicon Valley are now going to China. And so you have to ask yourself, how am I competitive with a 9 and 6 Chinese teams that are stamping these drugs? I think people used to cope with this by saying that, well, at least US is innovative. That's where China is still from. China can be creative. They can produce their own drugs. I don't think it's true at all. I think we are now starting to see like absolutely new science come out of Chinese labs that never been published in the US before. So it's clear not the execution speed. So far, it's still sort of the creativity of American biotech. That's why I personally prefer to work on a new therapeutic modality, because if it works, it's a big deal. If I were to work on an antibody for a known target, there are like thousands of Chinese biotechs doing the same thing. There are like 300 GLP-1 companies out there in China.
What? Really?
Yeah. They're just a slightly better version of GLP-1s. It's interesting because I think GLP-1 starting like a GLP-1 company now is sort of a biotech version of a Vibes app or like a wrapper. Like you actually can be working on a deep tech biotech like complicated company and still be doing meaningless things, or like things that have little counterfactual impact. That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah. Okay, so how are you thinking about building your own company and like actually shipping that first therapeutic that's not going to have like a massive impact, but it'll be like directionally correct?
Yeah, we are at animal study stage now. We are testing our drugs in mice. Our next stage is doing first in human trials. I think the cheapest way of doing it is going to China for any therapeutic modality.
Why is that?
China was actually like pretty slow in terms of their INDs and drug approvals before. They had 2 waves of deregulation in the past, say like 10 years, which allowed you to essentially get your IND package, which is like clinical trial application package, approved much sooner. It's also true that in China you can do an IIT, which is investigator-initiated trial, where you approach a doctor in a particular hospital and ask them to co-author the first in human clinical study. It's small scale. It doesn't give you an opportunity to go and like initiate phase 2 in United States after, but it gives you human data, which is like...
Why is human data so important?
Because that's where most of the things fail. They largely fail at efficacy stage, which is phase 2. Phase 1 has, depending on indication, has approximately like 50% failure rate, which is actually, I think, is not as bad as like software companies.
How many startups are created every year? And then like how many flame out?
Yeah, I don't know. Many. It's interesting. There are more drugs generating $1 billion per year than there are software companies doing the same.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it just one of those situations where as soon as you have a drug that is successful, it just gets sold to one of the big guys, and so it just goes into their portfolio?
Not even that. You don't even need to like approve a drug. Most startups never approve a drug. Most startups
just get the efficacy data. And
not
then they
in
go sell
efficacy.
it?
Sometimes for certain targets, in our case, we know that if our drug can target this target, and if drugs is safe, we know it will work, because if the target is genetically validated and someone targeted it before, it's like not a big jump to make. Many companies just show safety in phase 1 and then partner with a pharma to exit after, or partner on the asset and then continue developing.
And like on like a personal side, what do you do day to day to kind of increase the likelihood that you do live for a long time, even outside of just taking a bunch of random drugs?
Yeah, I'm not taking a bunch of random drugs, by the way. I do intermittent fasting. Have been doing it for many years now. I think it's just like an easier thing to do. Like once you get into it, you're actually like not hungry most of the time.
Except for when you want to DoorDash a burger into the redwoods.
We are trying to DoorDash a burger into redwoods.
Which apparently the cellular just out here doesn't work.
Yes. Yeah.
while you're trying to build this company, who are the role models that you've seen in the past that have built similar companies to the thing that you're trying to create? And like, what are you learning from them or taking
I
from
love
them?
this question. I love this question because I feel like not many people in Bay Area and Silicon Valley in general know about the heroes of biotech. But to me, one of the reasons Bay Area is so great is because partially biotech industry was born here with the birth of Genentech. So the two people that I would probably look up to the most is Bob Swanson, founder of Genentech, and John Maraganore, founder of Alnylam. Both of them worked on thematically something similar to what I'm trying to do, which is develop a therapeutic modality. In case of Genentech, that was the first recombinant proteins. Bob Swanson, amazing guy. He was working at Kleiner Perkins as a VC, didn't have a PhD. There was no biotech industry back then, no biotech VCs, no biotech companies. He gets fired from his job at Kleiner Perkins right around the age of 26, 27. So by the age of 27, he hasn't done truly much. And then he came across this paper from Stanley Cohen and Herbert Boyer on cloning. And cloning is this idea of like, can we take a particular protein and make many copies of it, like produce it at scale in bacteria by inserting the gene into bacteria and then outgrowing it with the bacteria. He came across this paper and he's like, holy shit, this is a big deal. This will be big. He called mails, not even called emails. He called mails. Herbert Boyer shows up in his lab. Herbert Boyer doesn't want to talk to him. He's like, we should start a company around this. No biotech company existed before that. They were like big pharma somewhere in the Europe that were working on dyes and heroin.
And this was like in the 70s, 80s,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. Like there weren't in many VC funds back then.
There was not like a whole lot of risk capital. And I know that like in the East, especially in the 90s, I think there was like a massive biotech boom.
Yeah.
Right? Like a bunch of companies were founded.
Genentech was part of that birth.
Was it just like right after that a bunch of those other companies were started because of the Genentech success?
There was in a way a race when Genentech started to clone the first human insulin. So before Genentech managed to, so right now you buy insulin that has been produced at scale in these like huge tanks. Before, what we would do if you have diabetes, we would slaughter 50 pigs per year to extract insulin from their pancreases for one patient per year. It wasn't very scalable. So what Bob Swanson saw back then is that we can use this cloning method to produce protein at scale. And he somehow managed to convince this academic to work with him. They got a lot of criticism back then because it was kind of considered bad taste to try to, for pure academics and scientists to go and try to make money from their science. They got a lot of bad press. They didn't raise a lot of money, but their execution speed was insane. And again, Bob Swanson wasn't a PhD. He wasn't like a legendary scientist. He was just some dude who got fired from his job and then read a paper. So I do really look up to him.
So how are you thinking about having like really, really fast execution speed, even if you're going to be working in something where the feedback loops are super long? Like, how do you do that?
I think you need to know the direction you are going with from the get-go. Many people start with a new technology. Many CRISPRs started with like, CRISPR, it just works without knowing where to apply it, like knowing that it might be useful for genetic disease, but not finding the right target to apply it to. Before we started, we already knew like the direction that will take this technology. It was super clear. I think that saved us probably years because by the time we were raising our first round, we literally heard feedback that like, what you guys figured out early on is what many people figure out like once they have like years of data and then they start thinking about their clinical strategy. Like, I think because it's one of those examples where it's like tough times create strong men, tough biotech markets create amazing biotech companies, and you kind of have to be more disciplined with your execution, not to like spread yourself thin in multiple directions, just like figure out the direction you want to go at and execute.
And go for it. Okay.
Yeah, I think one big thing is like not taking on a lot of scientific risk. People
What do you mean by that?
I generally split the risk in building biotech company into engineering and scientific. I would always prefer the engineering risk to scientific risk. The question with scientific risk is like the unknown. Like, if I target this protein, will it cure this disease? Like, I never want to take that type of risk. Like,
that is the thing that costs like $1 billion or whatever to figure out?
I mean, even if you know the thing that you want to target, it would still cost you like $2 billion to approve a drug. That's the average right now. But I don't think any of the best-selling drugs of all time we're trying to do truly new biology. They usually targeted the proteins that had years of papers published around it. Like some examples of best-selling drugs of all time is like Humira and Keytruda. Those were like known proteins, and they weren't the first ones to target those proteins. So I never want to work with new biology. I think biological and scientific risk is a dumb risk unless you have like billions in capital and just like you want to do lots of crazy things and infinite runway, which is like probably like a cool company to build too. Like eventually I want to get to a place where I take on way more risk, but with a small startup, you kind of need to know that the first things that you try will work.
Or else you never get to the stage where you have like the infinite runway to go tackle all that other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so with engineering risk, the question is like, can you get your molecule to the set of properties that would allow it to be a drug? And that's much easier to address because many people addressed it multiple times before. We know how to engineer proteins. We know how to do high throughput screens. Like that's a much easier thing to do.
So what are the different stages of your company going to be? Like walk me through the next like 5 years and what are you going to be doing?
Yeah, so we've existed for almost 2 years now. Our first year was focused on developing the technology, optimizing it, testing it largely in cell lines in dishes, and formulating it to get it to the stage where we can dose mice with those and show that it's efficacious in mice, which is where we're now. Once you show that it works in mice, you do the final few tweaks to make sure that your molecule is as specific as it can be. It's safe. It can be dosed at the lowest possible dose so that you're not overdosing your humans. You test it in monkeys and usually prepare an IND package.
What's an IND package?
IND enabling study is a study that you submit to FDA to ask them to run your phase 1 clinical trial. It usually includes monkey data and mice data, depending on your indication. It includes a batch of drug manufactured at scale, safe for human use, which has all kinds of its own restrictions. So once we have our monkey data, that's the package we will be submitting. And after that, off to the races with human data. Yeah.
And I know you said that you're going to do monkeys here in the US and then humans in China.
No, we might do monkeys in China too. But
really?
The calculus that I was giving you is sort of, if you compare the cost of monkey study in the US and the cost of human clinical trial in China, like monkey study in the US is somehow more expensive than running a human clinical trial.
You said it was like $1.5 million or $2 million?
Very much depends on sort of the type of drug. Like biologics are more expensive than small molecules, but yeah, you can run like a 10 people trial with AAT in China for like less than $2 million.
And what are you going to be looking for when you do those like first monkey studies? What data are you like expecting or like hoping for?
I don't know how much I can disclose about our programs, but usually with IND packages, largely safety.
So it's less like even on the like efficacious side, it's more just like, does this monkey die? or what?
People do efficacy studies in monkeys specifically. It depends on the disease because some monkeys might not have your disease. Many of the efficacy studies are done in mice. Actually, okay, this is my like the biggest pain of the biotech. It's like that we are doing efficacy studies in mice, and I think it's actually like the biggest thing that slows aging field down.
Is it almost like counterproductive because it's just the wrong thing? Like you can do something in mice and it works, and then it just doesn't translate to humans.
Well, it's even worse than that. Like, say you're trying to take an Alzheimer's drug to humans. You test it in mice. Mice doesn't develop Alzheimer's. What are you? You can publish many papers on curing Alzheimer's in mice. Mice just doesn't have Alzheimer's. You create an artificial model where you're like, let's induce like overexpresses toxic proteins from human in mice brain and pretend that it's Alzheimer's. No, it's thousands of things at the same time. One protein will never recapitulate it. It's true for basically every other disease, age-related disease that humans have. Like mice largely die of cancer. They don't die of heart attacks. It's like, so if anything, like if you find something that cures cancer, you can probably very drastically extend lifespan in mice. But human cancer is just one of the causes of death in humans.
What are the biggest causes of death in humans?
Depends on the country. In US, it's still cardiovascular disease, which is actually kind of interesting because I think our generation would be the first generation not to die like of cardiovascular disease. It really doesn't make sense to me that high cholesterol will be an issue like 30 years from now, even if no more progress will be made. Imagine like we are like totally failing in research and development. We just have so many solutions not to have, including GLP-1s. Earlier this year, Eli Lilly, one of the biggest pharmas of all time, like I love those guys, they bought a gene editor that permanently lowers your cholesterol. Very squeaky clean safety. We'll see where they'll take it. It's still in phase 1 clinical trials, but like 20 years from now,
this is just going to kind of be a solved problem.
Well, it depends on how much tolerance you have for doing something like a gene editor. I don't know if you would be willing to do a gene editor. I think,
probably.
Yeah, it's
yes.
Yeah, like why not? You can. Why would you decide to like pop statins for the rest of your life if you can gene edit your liver to stop cranking out LDL?
How do the incentives work? Because if a company can just like edit your genes and suddenly you don't have any problem with statins, isn't like statins a massive multi-billion-dollar industry? And why would someone invest in figuring out how to solve it permanently?
Yeah, I mean, statins no longer make that much money because they're generic, so it's like a very cheap pill to manufacture and everyone can manufacture it. But you're right that there is like a broken incentive structure about how to pay for drugs that cure the disease. I think it's especially broken in the US because you have a multi-payer system and there is no reason for anyone to prevent the disease that occurs after you're 65, because after 65, who pays for your drugs? It's Medicare. Before that, you rotate your insurance every few years. So why would one insurer pay for your one and done drug if you'll change the insurance and they'll never reap the benefits of you being healthy? It's not a solved problem. I don't know what's a solution here. I suspect Lilly is thinking about possible solutions if they bought a one and done drug for high cholesterol. But eventually we do have to figure it out because I can't imagine an aging drug being approved and widely used and being commercially successful in this type of system, unless people pay out of pocket, which is probably a working model too, like direct to consumer, which is I used to think it's weird. I think it's becoming more popular now with like Lilly Direct, where they sell GLP-1s direct to consumer instead
like
of
the HIMSS model.
Yeah,
or
yeah, HIMSS. Yeah.
When you're thinking like day to day, when you wake up in the morning, what are you spending your time on?
Changed over time. Often it's unfortunately a lot of it is like arguing with vendors. And
what's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, biology is annoying. It's like the worst discipline for an impatient person to be in because you just can't make your cells grow faster. There's like a limit to how many times cells divide per unit of time, so you can't just like scream at your cells and make them divide, or like you can't accelerate your experiment because there's like a biological bottleneck on time. And same with vendors. I think I'm known as a person who could just like very good arguing with them. I think it's kind of like my talent.
What do those typical arguments look like? Make the cell grow faster.
This study costs 100K. Like, well, can we make it 10K? They're like, well, that's the cost of mine. I was like, well, we'll do many more studies with you. Can we make it 10K? They're like, yes. Or we'll ship it to you next week. We're like, no, we need it this week. No, can we ship? And I'm sure it's like true for many other deep tech industries where you're like, where are my parts? The same is true for me. It's like, where are my parts? Where's my mRNA?
So is the general like pace in biotech just extremely slow? And you're kind of like at every point in the cycle, or every action that you're taking is basically just trying to speed it up by a few days on every little interaction and like decrease cost.
Yeah. Doesn't seem to be too slow in China. I think it's fundamentally that the biotech industry in the United States became complacent.
What do you mean by that? Like, what does complacency look like?
Not rushing to develop a drug for your patients, spending too much time optimizing the technology. I think CRISPR companies especially has been guilty of that.
Were they just like indefinitely or in this research cycle and never actually
look, we have a better CRISPR than that other companies. Like, why does it matter if your drug is not in the patient doing the thing? I think a lot of it was obsession with a slightly better IP from Stanford or from MIT, where you have a patent with like a fancy name on it, which is slightly better than the patent from that other lab, and people assign way too much value to something like that versus actually developing the thing and taking it to patients, which is actually the harder part of drug development. It's not hard to develop new technology.
What have been the biggest pitfalls in the industry that if you just kind of like wrung those out, things would be moving way faster and we'd invent way more drugs and therapies?
Testing science in the wrong model. Like, as I said before, it's like, doesn't matter that you cured Alzheimer's in mice because mice doesn't have Alzheimer's. Doesn't matter.
Is it a little bit like focusing on some result and like because you can measure it, you're like, look, we did something good.
Yeah.
And so you create Alzheimer's in mice and then you solve it and you're like, that's great, but it didn't actually solve anything.
Yes.
You spend a bunch of years just basically twiddling your thumbs almost.
Yeah, like organoid models is like a slightly better version of cell culture, just 3D and maybe has some features resembling an organ, but it's not an actual organ. So it doesn't matter that you validated your drug in organoids because it's like a slightly more complicated version of cell culture.
When I was like 11 or 12, I've been thinking about this idea of like longevity escape velocity and how can I basically live for an extra day every 24 hours? And then eventually you just get to this point where you're like 150, but you're like living to 151 because you got there.
Yeah, I don't know how you can like
measure that.
Do that calculation in an intellectually honest way, but I think there is like sort of a best case and the worst case scenario for everything. Worst case scenario is progress, but linear progress. So we don't discover any new things and we just continue to develop drugs very slowly over time. I think in that case, we are probably close to solving cardiovascular disease. And that cuts your lifespan at around 72 years in the United States. In Japan, people don't die of heart attacks.
Why is that?
Just healthier food, healthier lifestyle. They die of cancer and other things, but their lifespan is much higher than that in the US. So they believe, I think the median or mean is close to 80 years, or 78, I don't remember. And so like, I think that's the worst case scenario. We just solved cardiovascular disease and extended lifespan by a few more years. Best case scenario is acceleration, or us just stumbling upon some unknowns that multiply the speed at which we discover new drugs and test new drugs. And I think it happened a few times in the aging space in the past few decades, where we discovered the things that never existed before that looks very promising. I think partial reprogramming and epigenetic reprogramming is one of those things. Maybe GLP-1s.
So when you started getting into longevity in the first place, what was the process for just like coming up to speed as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up dropping out of college, so I never got a proper bio degree, which I think is good because the way bio is taught in college is just a horrific experience that is tailored to pre-med students who just obsess over doing their Anki cards but not actually understanding the thing. I think the problem with bio education is that it's taught almost like as one would teach history, where you have a bunch of entities and you try to memorize the relationship between those entities. But in my day-to-day work, I never think about like all the organelles that human cells has. Like if you ask the most legendary drug developers to name, like ask them to name organelles,
they just can't.
Like no one can do that. Or like it's not consequential for developing a drug. And I don't think bioeducation is tailored towards teaching you those more practical things. So I think being self-taught in bio is actually not a shortcoming. I mean, I started by just reading papers and trying to understand them, all the key papers in agent space. I also did spend some time just collaborating with different scientists when, right after I dropped out, I just like emailed a few scientists that I liked and I was like, can we work on a project together? And got exposure to bio that way. But yeah, I don't feel like I missed much by not having like a formal training in biology.
Deciding like what to focus on and, learn about in the first place. Like, how did you kind of go through that to come to something where you can actually take that knowledge and go apply it versus just memorize it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the type of person who does OnGeekCars. My OnGeekCars look very different from like try to memorize every single organ and every single organelle and every single protein name. There are 20,000 proteins. Like, why would I ever memorize them all? I think the most practical way is to go and actually do something and then realize where the gaps are. In a way, I think of modern day education is like having a garage or like a car dealership where your objective is to fix a car, but instead of fixing the car, you just spend decades trying to accumulate the tools to get slightly better at fixing the car. Eventually, you have like all these hammers and screwdrivers, and eventually, decades later, you actually get to fixing the car, and like all of a sudden, your tools are rusty and like you actually don't know how to do the thing. So I think that's sort of the benefit of getting out in the real world and like trying to do the thing, because like most of the things you learn in college you'll never apply, so you might as well just like start from the other end where you try to apply the thing and like back propagate to what like nodes of knowledge you actually have to gain to do this.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like, you basically take your car and you're like, what's broken with it? What exactly, like, what are the tools that I need to know or get in order to fix this one part?
Yes, instead of accumulating the tools.
Instead of just like going to Home Depot and just clicking off the shelf.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a world where we're living kind of forever, how are you deciding to take actions in your own life? If you're going to live 200 or 300 years, I imagine that you have a very different time horizon for taking, like, having kids or, spending 100% of your time on building a company for the first 20 years of your life.
I love that question. I love that question because if you live on such a long horizon, the types of projects you take on are completely different from the project you take on if you only have like 50 years of productive lifespan. Eventually, suddenly you start getting decide to get PhDs that actually takes, 15, 20 years because it's so complicated and in a completely new field of science. I think being able to live that long will just make people more ambitious.
So for yourself, like, what are you doing? Like, what actions are you taking or not taking with that kind of understanding?
In terms of like projects I take on, or like
even company building. Like, if someone has traditionally, the like greats of the past had maybe 60 years to build some generational company and then effectively they died, are you kind of taking a different approach? Are you trying to be more methodical or decide what to go after on a longer time horizon?
I think I'm the type of person who would rather fail spectacularly than succeed conventionally. So I do start by working on the things that I actually want to do instead of like building up to it over many decades of building like mediocre projects. I want each next decade of my life to be like crazier than the one before. Like, each new project that I take on be like more risky and more intense than the previous one.
Are you going to be taking also, like, I imagine that if you are trying to live for a very long time, in my mind, it would make sense to, if you want to just go pursue your own projects that are self-directed, you'd probably want to be rich. And so at least in the way I'd think about it, is like, get lots of money today by doing something, building some company, taking all that money. And it's not like indirectionally correct. I think Sam Altman talked about, there's a lot of people out there that say, I want to go build the rocket company, but first I'm going to start the crypto hedge fund, make $100 million and then self-fund the rocket company. And the reality is, like, if they just went after the rocket company, they'd be able to build that. or just go after the crypto
Yeah,
company and they'd still be able to build that.
You probably also noticed that in Silicon Valley, there are many people who like want to do the ambitious things. They want to launch rockets into space, and then they're like, well, I'll build a software company first and then get super rich. But the reality is like actually building software company is actually not that easy. It's not like that everyone who starts software company succeeds, because most of them fail. And also like, even if you succeed, the number of successes where your outcome is like $1 billion in your pocket is like so tiny. Like in most cases, the outcome would be that you make $1 million or $2 million by selling your company after a few years. And like, guess what? You can raise $2 million in venture funding like in a few weeks for actually doing the thing that you want to do.
Yeah. In a world where we're living, 200 years or longer, how do you think society is going to look?
I certainly do hope that people would be more ambitious than they are now, because they don't have limitations on time. I think there are definitely some moral issues that we'd have to deal with, because if every dictator has an opportunity to live thousands of years, we don't cleanse the system one death at a time. But I don't know if every person would want to live that long, or at least some people say that they wouldn't.
It's a little weird because I just don't.
That makes sense.
Then when
right?
you actually go to something where Canada is like, we can do assisted suicide, it deeply feels wrong. And I think even like Elon would be like, why the fuck, we don't want assisted suicide or like incentivizing suicide in people. So
yeah, I think in Canada specifically, those cases are largely centered on living with a disease that is so devastating that the death is preferred. I think one of the first cases of assisted suicide in Canada was around this woman with ALS. But I mean, some ALS patients live only for like less than 10 years, but there is also Stephen Hawking, who lived an entire life after being diagnosed with ALS and actually was like very intellectually productive throughout that whole period, and even managed to have a mistress during that time.
he was a real partier.
Was he?
Oh yeah. Final question: what's the hardest thing you've overcome?
I think the whole journey of getting to the United States was a pretty tough one, partially because it feels conventional right now. It's just like everyone applies to college, everyone learns different languages, but I think I was just alone and very isolated on this journey. I was 14, living in Kiev. At some point, I realized a mismatch between the ambitions that I had and where I was, and just like trying to come up with a plan for how to get across the ocean. I think my parents were pretty critical of this idea. Not because they thought it was a bad idea, they just thought that I'll definitely fail. And so they didn't want me to get disappointed early in life by doing something like that. But I think, just finding my way here and then finding my way to building the thing that I'm building was quite isolating at times, where I think I couldn't even like find people around me who've ever been to America, or been outside of my small hometown in like Eastern Ukraine. So it's might not be like a very specific answer, because it was like a multi-year journey, and it's also journeys that many immigrants go through, but there are many moments where I almost didn't make it.
What was that like?
Like I applied to 10 colleges and like 9 of them rejected me, and then I was like, it's done. There was like one response remaining. I was like, well, if everyone rejected me, like this one will definitely reject me, because it was like one of my top choices. Sorry.
At what point did things kind of flip where you were here and you kind of knew that things were going to be okay?
Still don't feel that way.
Really?
Yeah. Still feel like any day things might fail and I might end up on the street, but what's the worst case scenario? Like if I'm alive, everything is fine. it was tough for many years, even here, because just like the learning curve of new culture and the new language, like I literally learned English by studying for SATs, which I don't recommend anyone
No.
does. It was
Yeah.
like a horrible experience. And then I arrived here and I've never been to an English speaking country before. And suddenly I'm like surrounded by a bunch of smart kids and have to go to classes and like,
Pretend like you're learning because I mean, when I went to Poland, it was the same thing where I just showed up. They didn't do anything. So I went to Poland when I was 16 for a foreign
nice.
exchange. They didn't do anything to change the classes whatsoever. And I showed up there and didn't know Polish. And so they were just speaking Polish the entire time
Yeah.
and just pointing at the chalkboard and stuff. And people would come up and do a speech. And I didn't understand any of it.
No,
Like I
yeah.
only learned it 10 months in, but that was when I left.
No, I had a lot of embarrassing moments, which is like not knowing English properly. um, I had to record my classes my first year in college, like on an audio, so that I can listen to it after. I mean, it was way before AI, but like I just like couldn't understand things on the fly. Yeah, it feels like all of that was like so long ago, but it's just been, I don't know, like 5 years since I've been here.
Yeah. Do your parents still feel the same way?
Every time I come up with something new to try, they definitely are like, oh, this is a crazy idea. I mean, I got to college here and they're like, oh, wow, she made it. And then a few years later, I'm like, I'm actually dropping out. And they're like, this is an insane idea. What are you doing? And I think they're still very much worried. They're trying to make sense of like what it means for someone to do science. It's like, okay, have you discovered something today? And I'm like,
Not yet, not quite.
I mean, we might discover something new like every few months, but it's definitely not on a daily timeline.
So for the like internal drive and deciding to make decisions that are going to be very, very non-consensus, especially like in your family where people are not like they've never known anyone probably that is doing what you're doing. Where do you think you kind of got the internal conviction to go, one, leave your country, then go to college, then to like drop out in the first place? Like, how'd you make those decisions?
I think just like my internal experience of life is like, it feels like I'm living in a video game. So I just like try to optimize for the most interesting outcome at any given point in time. And my sense of risk is still there. It's still strong, but it's like slightly muted. That I'm like, well, I keep doing like crazy things and like I never regretted it. Like every big risk I've taken in my life always paid out. Like I don't think there ever been a regret. So maybe it's like some kind of fallacy, but I think just people don't take enough of risks and the outcomes are never as bad as they seem.
I definitely think that in a lot of cases, people think of, they hear the word risk or they think of the word risk, and there's like obvious risk where you don't want to go buy a bunch of call options on Robinhood with your entire net worth. Like
Why not?
That's yeah, exactly right. Like exactly. But people think that that's the same risk as like sending an email or going and taking an action where you like get on a plane somewhere, and those are not the same things. And like most of the time when you go take that action, we are kind of getting on a plane, there's like serendipity. You're kind of like unlocking a box of serendipity, and like maybe nothing happens, but maybe something does happen, and the likelihood of something happening is much higher.
It's like imagine you're like reading a book about with you being the main character. Like, are you satisfied with the life that this main character is living?